Thank you, everyone. Thank you to that incredible choir and band, and thanks to...
You celebrate while others starve. You raise cups in toast while children raise empty hands. And you call this freedom. Woe to you, leaders who call this victory. For the blood of the innocent cries from the earth. And I have heard enough.
This is not just a dream, not just politics, but a vision straight from the courts of heaven. On July 4th, 2025, while America celebrated, Jesus showed a believer what was truly happening in the Spirit. Trump standing on stage with blood on his hands, J.D. Vance trading mercy for applause, and a nation sliding into judgment while calling it progress. You're about to hear a prophetic warning that exposes not just government lies, but the spiritual condition behind them. A shaking is coming, and heaven will not stay silent. Do you think this is just coincidence? Or is God trying to wake us up before it's too late? Let us know what you believe in the comments. Subscribe to NDE Stories Jesus, because this might be the most important story you'll hear before everything changes. July 4th, 2025. It was supposed to be a day of celebration, a day of parades, pride, and patriotic speeches, but instead, that was the day the Lord took me into a vision, and I saw what few dare to imagine. I was in prayer that morning, just before sunrise, when suddenly the air in my room shifted, like the sound of thunder without the noise. My body went numb, my spirit lifted, and I was no longer in my room. I was above the earth. The first thing I saw was America, not as a map, but as a living body, wounded, bleeding, with bruises that pulsed like open sores across its land. A red river, not of water, but of blood, flowed from the west to the east, over cities, farms, highways, seeping into the ground like a curse that could not be washed away. Then I saw him, Jesus, standing beside me, clothed in white, yet his robe was soaked at the hem in crimson. His face was full of sorrow, not anger, but grief, a grief so deep it pierced me more than any sword could. I asked, "Lord, what am I seeing?" He didn't speak at first. He just looked at the land below, at the flames rising from Capitol Hill, not natural fire, but the fire of deception, greed, and betrayal. Then he finally turned toward me and said,
This nation once knew me, but it has chosen to forget. I blessed her, I walked with her, I defended her, but she has now turned her back and called evil good and good evil.
As I looked closer, I saw the cities darkening, lights going out one by one, and I heard the cries of the poor, the widows, the sick, the ones with no voice in politics, mothers cradling empty bowls, fathers staring at unpaid hospital bills, children curled on beds with no medicine to ease their pain. Above them hovered dark shapes, like shadows with chains, whispering lies to leaders. Cut more, tax more, take more. I saw men in suits sign documents that looked like paper, but in the spirit, they were contracts written in blood. And every time a pen touched the page, a light in a home went out. A child's heartbeat stopped. A doctor walked away in despair.
When you strip care from the sick, when you rob the hungry to feed the proud, you do it unto me.
I wanted to look away. I wanted to scream, but he made me watch, because truth must be seen to be understood. I saw the House of Representatives, not as it appears on C-SPAN, but as a theater, full of masks and mirrors. One side shouting, the other laughing, but beneath the stage were the bones of the forgotten, stacked like bricks. One man stood up and cried for justice, but his voice was mocked, not for the content, but for the way his hands moved. I saw demons whisper, "He looks funny, doesn't he?" And others laughed, not realizing they were laughing while people died. Then the vision shifted, and I saw the heart of America. It was cracked, not in half, but in hundreds of pieces, floating in space, suspended by mercy. Only mercy. And I wept, because I saw how close it was to falling completely.
I have called, I have warned, through prophets, through scripture, through storms and signs in the heavens. Yet still they mock my name and trust in man.
He pointed, and I saw fireworks rising over Washington, D.C., while below them hospitals closed their doors, while confetti rained down at political rallies, children wept from hunger, and in heaven, the angels turned away their faces. What terrified me most was not what was happening, but what was yet to come. I asked, "Lord, is there still hope?" And his answer chilled my bones.
My mercy endures, but not forever. America stands at the edge of a great shaking, and what cannot be shaken will remain.
And then I was back in my room, the air thick with holiness, my pillow soaked with tears, and I knew this was not just a dream. It was a warning, a trumpet from heaven for a nation that has traded righteousness for pride, truth for power, love for lawlessness. This was the beginning of the unraveling, and only repentance could stop it. After that vision, I thought it was over, but the Lord wasn't done. I felt myself pulled again, this time deeper, not upward but inward, into the halls of power, the very core of America's government. I stood in the House of Representatives, but it wasn't the marble room I'd seen in news footage. This place was darker, pulsing with unrest, the ceiling twisted like smoke. The walls bled the colors of flags burned by compromise. Every seat was filled with men and women wearing masks of confidence. But behind those masks were hollow eyes, eyes of those who had once known truth, but had bartered it away. I saw a man stand up. He looked like a prophet disguised as a politician. His voice was strong, not political, but human, broken, trembling, full of righteous anger. He cried out about health care, about families who would lose everything, about hospitals that would shut their doors, about fathers who could no longer pay for insulin, about grandmothers forced to choose between food and medicine. His words weren't just words. They were flames, and with every syllable I saw spirits of truth swirl around him like doves. But the rest of the chamber was unmoved. Some rolled their eyes, others chuckled. And then I heard a whisper, not from a man, but from a presence hiding behind the seat of influence, a spirit of mockery. It said, "He waves his hands too much. Is he rapping or using sign language?" And the whole room burst into laughter, not realizing that hell itself was laughing with them. What I saw next made my soul ache. A Republican lawmaker held up his phone, showing a social media post, mocking the man's speech, dismissing his truth because he didn't like his style. And then I saw J.D. Vance, not as the media paints him, but as he truly was in spirit. A man torn. One side of his face looked toward light. The other was buried in shadows. He held a vote in his hands, but his decision wasn't based on justice or compassion or discernment. It was based on spite, personal vendetta, and fear. I heard the words echo from his spirit. I wasn't going to support the bill, but after watching that guy speak, I changed my mind. And then heaven grew silent.
When legislation is decided by personality, not principle, you have left my kingdom. When the fate of millions is cast like a die in the hands of the petty, you are playing with the blood of the innocent. This is not just foolishness. It is murder in disguise.
I saw angels withdraw from the chamber, their wings folded, their swords sheathed, not because they were defeated, but because they were not permitted to interfere where hearts had fully turned to stone. The chamber began to flicker, like an old bulb gasping for power. And then the room grew cold, and I saw the spirits of manipulation and confusion take seats among the lawmakers, whispering into ears, swapping papers, twisting language. No one noticed. They were too busy scoring points, trading sarcasm, playing gods. And then a woman rose, not in pride, but in burden, and she began to speak. It was AOC. In the spirit, she appeared surrounded by a trembling flame, small, flickering, but real. She spoke not as a politician, but as a witness. She shared of tips, of living on almost nothing, of knowing hunger, of watching the rich get richer while the poor die in silence. As she spoke, her words became chains, not to bind, but to reveal. Chains that had wrapped themselves around the ankles of working mothers, around the stomachs of children, around the minds of the elderly. She spoke of how this bill was not a solution. It was a deal with the devil. She said it plainly, fearlessly, and I saw demons snarl, because when truth is spoken clearly, lies lose their grip. I saw others mocking her, calling her dramatic, emotional. But heaven took note of every word she said. I turned to the Lord, shaken, and asked him what would happen if this law passed.
If this law is enacted, blood will cry out from the ground. Mothers will weep in bathroom stalls. Fathers will break under the weight of pride and poverty. And those who celebrated will not escape what they have sown. They have traded my bread for stones, my healing for paper, my justice for a joke. Woe to the nation that mocks the cry of the poor, for I am the defender of the voiceless.
And as he said those words, the chamber began to collapse in the vision, not in the physical, but in the spirit. It folded inward, into itself, swallowed by its own deception. I screamed, not out of fear, but out of mourning, for what this nation was allowing, for what we were becoming. And still the bill moved forward. And still they laughed. The vision did not end. As the chamber of Congress crumbled inward in the spirit, the Lord lifted me again, higher now, and I could see not just America, but the ripple effect that her decisions were sending across the world. Like a great stone crashing into still waters, every law passed in that chamber sent waves of destruction into distant lands. Trade, currency, hunger, war. And standing above it all was a figure I recognized. Donald Trump. But not as the world saw him. In this vision, he was cloaked in gold and fire, surrounded by voices chanting his name, but beneath his feet were the prayers of widows being crushed like dust. His face was confident, almost smug. Yet when I looked closer, I saw that his crown was not made of honor, but of compromise, flattery, and manipulation. He held in his hand a bill, the same healthcare legislation that had been debated. It glowed with fire, but it was a fire that consumed, not healed. He raised it high above his head, and the crowds cheered, but the heavens fell silent. Then I saw him speak, not to the people, but to himself, admiring what he believed was his victory. I saw through his words, through the performance, through the carefully crafted image. He wasn't celebrating justice or progress. He was celebrating himself. I saw July 4th, 2025, not as a national holiday, but as a stage, a broken parade, a desperate attempt to regain control, to rewrite the narrative, even at the cost of a nation's soul.
He did not pass this bill for righteousness, but for revenge. He did not seek the good of the people, but the glory of self. What he calls victory, I call vanity. What he calls strategy, I call strife.
At that moment, I was shown the faces of those impacted. A mother in Ohio shaking in a grocery aisle as her EBT card was declined. A veteran in Texas turned away from urgent care because his Medicaid was gone. A child in South Carolina lying in bed with fever, unable to see a doctor. I could hear their prayers, soft, desperate, like whispers into a void. I turned to the Lord, weeping, and said, "Does he not hear them?"
He hears only the voice of praise and closes his ears to the sound of the suffering. They have turned the stage of politics into an altar to themselves. But I tell you this, I do not share my glory, and I will not be mocked.
I then saw J.D. Vance again, but this time he stood in a theater, trying to explain the bill to an invisible audience. Each time he spoke, his words formed smoke, incoherent slogans. Growth is freedom. Tariffs bring prosperity. But behind him, factories were shutting down. I saw Nike shoes burned in bulk, shipping ports empty, families paying 5 times the price for basic clothes and food. I saw a father in West Virginia look at the tag on a child's t-shirt and whisper, "How did this become unaffordable?" I saw mothers holding receipts like mourning scrolls, and Vance just kept speaking. Louder, more frantic, as if volume could replace vision. But no one was listening, not because they didn't care, but because his words had no weight. They were like balloons in a storm, colorful, but empty.
When a leader exchanges truth for talking points, he becomes a clown in the courts of heaven. Vance once knew right from wrong, but now he dances to a song that is not of me. He has forgotten the widow, the worker, the child. He has taken up the cause of a king, but it is not my kingdom he builds.
I saw Trump and Vance together in a vision, laughing on stage as they held up products made by cheap labor. Behind them, the American flag dripped with water, not from rain, but from tears. Tears of those who had believed in a lie, who had thought that policies were being crafted for their good, only to discover it was all a show. Then the Lord pointed to a great crack forming across the land. From Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles, the earth began to tremble in the spirit. Not literal yet, but inevitable. And I knew judgment was not just coming. It had already begun. Not with fire or flood, but with deception, confusion, and pride.
Pride comes before the fall, and America has lifted herself high above the clouds. She has called herself blessed while ignoring the blood at her doorstep. She has laughed in my temple and mocked my messengers. And now I will shake what can be shaken, until only the unmovable remains.
I fell to my knees, trembling in spirit, and I knew that these were not mere political warnings. They were prophetic alarms, ringing not only for America, but for every nation watching. Because when the mighty fall, the earth shakes, and the world holds its breath. The vision shifted again, and I found myself standing in the middle of a long burning corridor, lined with broken hospital beds, empty wheelchairs, crushed pill bottles, and silent monitors that once beeped with life. The air was thick, not with smoke, but with sorrow. Souls moved slowly through the hallway, not ghosts, but the unseen casualties of decisions made in polished offices, decisions that had removed hope from the sick, the poor, the elderly. And then I heard the phrase echo like a gong. This is the deal with the devil. The scene morphed into a courtroom, but it wasn't earthly. It was spiritual. On one side stood those who had crafted the bill, holding folders full of talking points, charts, and applause lines. On the other side stood the voiceless, a single mother, a wounded veteran, a child on dialysis. They did not speak, They simply stood, waiting, hoping someone would defend them. But there was no defense, only a transaction. The bill was passed, celebrated, signed, declared a victory. And in the spirit, I saw it for what it truly was. A scroll wrapped in barbed wire, dipped in ink made of tears. As the scroll was unrolled, demons danced around it, clapping, whispering, rejoicing. And then I heard her voice. AOC, not as a politician now, but as a trumpet, crying out with fire. Her words came like arrows dipped in truth, sharp, unrelenting, piercing through the veil of excuses. She spoke of tips, of waiting tables, of barely surviving, of how the bill would rip food out of babies' mouths and medicine out of the hands of the dying. She said what no one else dared say, that this bill was not just policy. It was predation. It was a theft disguised as reform. It was robbery committed with a smile. And then I saw the spirits react. The spirits of greed snarled. Spirits of deception hissed. But the truth could not be hidden. It was glowing now, rising like fire in a dry field. The more she spoke, the more it spread. Not everyone received it. Some mocked her, but heaven recorded every word. For in that moment, her voice was not just political, it was prophetic.
She has seen what others refuse to see. She remembers the smell of empty pots, the pain of stretched paychecks. And she speaks not just for herself, but for the ones who cannot speak. I am the God who hears the cry of the lowly, and I will not be silent.
I then saw the law take effect, not in headlines, but in households. Refrigerators went empty. Pharmacy counters gave "we're sorry" instead of pills. Children with asthma gasped through the night. The elderly clutched unpaid bills like death notices. And in the spirit, I saw angels stand by helpless, not because they were powerless, but because the nation had rejected intervention. They had chosen this. And all of it, all the loss, all the pain, had been traded away for one thing: a tax cut, a bait, a poisoned candy handed to the middle class while the rich feasted behind velvet curtains. People smiled at the rebate, only to find their safety net cut away.
You have sold mercy for money, compassion for convenience, and justice for an extra coin. And you dare call it savings? What you call efficiency, I call execution. You have not balanced a budget. You have balanced death on a ledger.
I saw a man weeping in a bathroom stall, shirt unbuttoned, eyes hollow. He had just found out that his child's chemotherapy would no longer be covered. I saw a single mother selling her last possessions online to buy diapers. I saw a nurse collapse in the hallway after being laid off because the hospital could no longer afford to stay open. And above it all, I saw demons counting souls, like numbers in a game. Then the vision zoomed out, and I saw the celebration. A party. Fireworks. Laughter. Trump standing on a podium with J.D. Vance beside him, holding up the signed bill like a trophy. The crowd roared. But in the spirit, the sound was different. It was not applause. It was the sound of chains being forged.
You celebrate while others starve. You raise cups in toast while children raise empty hands. And you call this freedom? Woe to you, leaders who call this victory. For the blood of the innocent cries from the earth, and I have heard enough.
As his words filled the vision, the light dimmed, not from darkness, but from judgment preparing to descend. The earth was holding its breath. Mercy was shrinking. And I knew in my spirit, if the people do not awaken now, they will awaken too late. The deal was made, but not with men. It was made with devils. The vision took another turn, and I was no longer in the halls of Congress, nor the hospitals, nor the homes of the poor. I was now standing inside something that looked like a palace. But the more I looked, the more I realized it was not a place of honor. It was a theater. Everything was painted gold. The floors gleamed. The flags waved proudly. But none of it was real. I could touch the walls, and my fingers would sink through the illusion. It was all a stage, a show built not for justice, but for the glory of a single man. In the center stood Donald Trump, arms raised high, a smile carved into his face like a mask, and behind him, a giant screen played scenes of applause, fireworks, and cheering crowds. But I looked into the screen and saw what others could not. Those clapping hands were bound in chains. The smiles were glued in place, while eyes filled with silent tears. It was a deception, a grand illusion of success, crafted by ego and sustained by lies. He walked across the stage, holding the healthcare bill as if it were a crown, his voice booming, boasting of accomplishments, calling it a win for America. But in the spirit, I saw the truth. The bill burned in his hands, invisible to men, but visible in heaven. Flames licked at his skin, but he didn't feel it, for pride had numbed his soul. I turned and saw J.D. Vance, standing beside him, eyes scanning the crowd, desperate for approval, clapping when Trump clapped, laughing when Trump laughed.
This is no longer governance. This is idolatry. They do not seek to serve. They seek to be seen. They do not protect the sheep. They dress them for slaughter. And they have turned my people into an audience, into props, into pawns.
I saw Vance once more, not as a politician, but as a man divided. His face flickered between two expressions, one of clarity and one of confusion. Deep within him, I saw a younger version, the man who once warned that Trump would be the death of the American Republic. That man still existed, but he was buried, suffocating under layers of ambition, calculation, and compromise. He spoke now, loud, passionate, justifying the tariffs, the economic shift, the rising prices. But as he spoke, the words fell to the ground like lead. No one picked them up, no one believed. I saw a crowd before him, not clapping, but staring. Their grocery bills in hand, their unemployment slips, their empty fuel tanks. They did not cheer. They simply endured.
When a man traded his convictions for a seat at a table of kings, he did not gain power. He lost his soul. Vance once stood at the edge of truth, but he stepped back. And now he stands in a place I cannot bless.
I saw images flash like lightning. A father in Kentucky selling his tools to pay for his daughter's surgery. A grandmother in Detroit rationing blood pressure pills, stretching 1 week into 3. A single mother in Arizona crying behind the counter of a diner as her SNAP card gets denied. These were not numbers. These were lives, sacred, eternal. And the policies praised on stage were leaving trails of brokenness behind them. But on the screen behind Trump and Vance, the illusion continued. Gas is cheaper. Unemployment is low. America is winning. I saw these words in bold, but in the spirit, they were written in dust, easily blown away by the wind of truth. And then I saw Trump in a factory. A satirical image played over and over on foreign media. He was sewing Nike shoes with Elon Musk beside him, J.D. Vance folding t-shirts. At first, it looked comical, but the Lord showed me this was not comedy. It was a prophetic symbol of shame. Nations were laughing, not at jokes, but at a giant who no longer inspired respect. The king was uncovered, and the world saw him for what he had become.
He promised honor, but delivered humiliation. He promised strength, but brought strife. and those who follow him in blind devotion shall share in his fall, for I am the Lord. I do not share my glory with any man.
At the edge of the vision, I saw the American flag, waving but torn, stars falling like embers, stripes soaked in something heavier than rain. It was not the end, but it was a warning, a final alarm before the curtain falls, not just on a presidency, but on a nation that has turned the stage of power into a temple of pride. And still, the actors performed, while heaven held its breath. The vision deepened, and I was brought lower, not into hell, but into something just as terrifying, the soul of a nation bleeding slowly and quietly. I stood in the middle of a once bustling supermarket, but the shelves were half empty. The prices were flashing red. A bottle of milk cost more than a day's wage for some. I saw people walking the aisles like ghosts, pushing carts but buying nothing, staring at receipts with trembling hands, parents whispering apologies to their children, promising food tomorrow. There were no headlines here, no applause, no politicians with microphones, only the silent suffering of millions. I walked past a woman in her 60s, holding a loaf of bread and a blood pressure cuff. She looked at both, then put the cuff back. Behind her, a young boy whispered, "Mama, I'm still hungry." And her face broke, not in anger, but in shame. This was the real America. Not the one on screens, not the one in speeches, but the one that was weeping behind closed doors. And then I saw the spirit of poverty, tall, thin, wrapped in chains. It did not attack violently. It simply wrapped its fingers slowly around homes, hearts, hope. Then I was lifted above the nation, and I saw factories shutting down, one by one, like organs failing in a dying body. Tariffs meant to punish enemies had only wounded the people within. I saw a father in Mississippi stare at his laid-off notice from a sneaker plant. I saw a factory floor in Illinois sit silent, covered in dust, with machines unplugged. And next to it, a billboard of Trump promising jobs, still hanging, faded by time and disbelief.
They have said, "Make America great again," but they have made her hungry again. They promised glory, but delivered grief, and still they do not repent. They dress in success while the body of the nation decays.
The next moment I stood in a shipping port, Boston, where massive containers once arrived daily. Now cranes stood still. Docks were empty. Truck drivers slept in cabs with no goods to deliver. One man sat with his head on the wheel, whispering a prayer he wasn't even sure God would hear. I looked inland. Stores were closing, restaurants empty, lights flickering, not from lack of electricity, but lack of hope. Then the vision shifted to the international stage. Japan appeared, not as a nation, but as a sentinel holding a scroll of U.S. Treasury bonds, shaking it like a sword. I heard the words, "They once trusted your currency. Now they question your soul." Global partners were pulling away, not because of politics, but because of instability, economic, moral, spiritual.
When you cannot be trusted with the least, you will not be entrusted with the nations. America once held the balance, but she now holds a knife to her own back. Her allies do not fear her enemies. They fear her pride.
Tourism collapsed. I saw flights canceled, airports dark, gift shops closed. Hotel staff sat on benches outside, scrolling through job listings that didn't exist. The Spirit showed me China and Japan withdrawing their people, warning them not to visit. I saw street performers in New York packing up violins, chefs in San Francisco closing kitchens, bellhops in Las Vegas saying final goodbyes to co-workers they called brothers. The entire hospitality engine, a pillar of post-pandemic hope, was dying. And the people were not just losing income, they were losing identity, purpose, dignity. And yet, in the White House, the celebration continued. Trump posted on social media, "Gas is down, groceries cheaper, the economy is booming." But I saw the truth. The gas pump showing 1 to 98 was photoshopped. The grocery aisles were not full. They were fabricated. It was a lie dressed in glitter.
When a leader tells lies while the people starve, he is no longer a leader. He is a devourer. Truth is not a prop for ratings. It is the standard of my throne, and I will tear down every idol built on falsehood.
Then I saw J.D. Vance again, standing on a platform, trying to justify everything. He shouted, "Growth is freedom." But no one responded. Not because they hated him, but because they were too tired to hope. His words were like sand, dry, blowing away in the wind. Behind him, a mother wept over a hospital bill. A young man walked into a pawn shop with his wedding ring. A child stared at a photo of their father who died after losing coverage. And still, they stood on stages. Still, they smiled. Still, they called it victory. I fell to my knees and cried, "Lord, how much longer?"
Until the last lamp goes out. I will wait. But the oil is low, the bridegroom is near, and the door will not stay open forever.
At that moment, I felt the trembling begin beneath my feet, and I knew the shaking was no longer coming. It had begun. The trembling did not stop. It grew stronger, not in the flesh, but in the spirit, like an invisible earthquake shaking the very soul of the nation. And then I was taken upward again, higher than before, beyond the stars, beyond the earth. I was being drawn into a realm I could not describe in human language, a chamber that existed outside of time. I knew immediately where I was, the court of heaven. It was vast, endless, pure, with no need for light, because the light came from the throne itself. The throne was white, blazing, not with fire, but with truth. And sitting on it was the Lord, not the Lamb I had seen in paintings, but the King of Kings, eyes like fire, voice like rushing waters, face both beautiful and terrible at once. The moment I stood before him, my legs gave out, not from fear, but from awe. On either side of him stood angels, not with harps, but with books. And the books were open. Inside them were the records of leaders, laws, motives, and secret decisions made in the dark. I saw names I recognized from TV, from politics, from history. And then I saw his name, Donald John Trump, and below it, James David Vance. The pages beneath their names were not blank, they were full, not just of words, but of weights, decisions, deals, moments of silence when they should have spoken, words spoken when they should have been silent. Then I heard the voice of the Lord, but he did not shout. He simply looked, and the truth unveiled itself. The bill they passed, the one celebrated as a triumph, was now laid open before the throne. It glowed red, pulsing, bleeding. Angels carried it like evidence in a trial.
I have weighed this legislation and found it wanting. It was not written for love, but for lust. Lust for praise, power, and personal glory. You called it policy, but in my court, it is persecution. You claimed it was for the people, but you never asked what I wanted for my people.
I saw the angels open another book, and out came the voices of the suffering. Real people, thousands, millions, their cries like waves in a storm. I lost my insulin. My baby died. I had to choose between rent and food. I prayed, and no help came. These were not statistics. These were witnesses, and they were not accusing out of vengeance. but because they had been sacrificed on the altar of ambition. And then the courtroom grew silent. I turned to see Trump standing, not physically but spiritually, before the throne. His hands were trembling, his face pale, yet still holding the posture of defiance. He tried to speak. He quoted numbers, charts, fake headlines, but every word vanished before it left his mouth. For no lie could survive in this place. He turned toward the crowd of witnesses, but none of them looked back. They were not there to argue. They were there to be seen. Then J.D. Vance appeared, and in that moment, I did not see a politician. I saw a man, broken, younger, tormented. He remembered who he used to be. The courtroom let him feel every moment he had compromised his conscience, every time he defended what he once condemned, every time he chose silence instead of courage.
You had a window, a chance to stand, and you chose a shadow instead of a sword. You dressed your fear as strategy. But I do not judge as men judge. I judge the heart, and your heart is divided.
Then I saw something terrible, the scroll of mercy for the nation, beginning to close, slowly, not slammed shut, but closing inch by inch. And I heard the groans of intercessors, grandmothers in prayer closets, pastors on their knees, young people fasting, crying out. They were the only reason the scroll hadn't closed completely. Their prayers were weights of mercy on the scale, delaying the shaking. I turned to the Lord, overwhelmed. "Is it too late?" I whispered.
Not yet. But soon, if they do not repent, if they do not humble themselves, the door will close, and what is shaken will not stand.
And then he looked at me, straight into my soul, and I knew he was not just speaking to presidents and senators. He was speaking to all of us. I was brought back down, not to my room, not to my country, but to a place I had never seen. A great field, vast and silent. The sky above it was gray, not with storm clouds, but with stillness, as if even the heavens were holding their breath. In the center of the field stood a single lamp, flickering, and I knew immediately what it was. It was mercy, the last light keeping the shaking at bay. All around the field were people, millions, but they weren't looking at the lamp. They were distracted, chasing fame, clinging to politics, staring at screens, arguing over shadows. Some were dancing, some were mocking. A few were sleeping, very few were kneeling. I looked closer, and I saw the church, not as buildings but as people. Some were shining with glory, but many were cracked, leaking oil, trying to appear full but empty inside. Pastors holding microphones but afraid to speak truth. Worshippers with raised hands but closed hearts. Prophets more loyal to platforms than to the presence. And I realized, this was not just about America's leaders. This was about us. The body, the bride, the witness to the world. Then the Lord spoke again, not with a thunderous voice, but with a whisper that shattered my spirit.
I have been patient. I have sent warnings. I have shaken walls, systems, thrones, but my people still sleep, my shepherds still play, my prophets still sell, and the door is closing.
I fell to the ground, sobbing, because I knew this was the final cry before the turning. The door he spoke of wasn't just salvation, it was access. Access to clarity, to power, to direction. And I saw what would happen if it closed. Confusion would flood in, false lights would rise, and the people would follow anything that looked like hope, even if it was poison. Then I saw the shaking begin, not just economically, not just politically, but spiritually. Churches that looked strong from the outside collapsed in a day. Leaders once exalted were exposed. Platforms turned into graves. False unity disintegrated into tribal chaos. I saw people running from one movement to another, screaming, "Where is the truth?" And a voice from heaven answered, "It was among you, but you silenced it."
You wanted comfort. I offered fire. You wanted a kingdom without a cross. You wanted me to follow you, but I called you to die. And now only those who know my voice will find the path.
Suddenly, a sound rang across the field. Not a trumpet, but a cry. A deep, desperate, holy cry from a remnant. A small group, not famous, not wealthy, not perfect, but hungry. They were on their faces, crying out, not for revival events, but for repentance, not for influence, but for intimacy. They didn't care who saw. They didn't ask for stages. They just wanted Him. And I saw oil flow toward them, not like a river, but like a thread of gold, marking them, sealing them, setting them apart. And the Lord smiled, just slightly, for even in judgment, He is moved by repentance.
If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven. I will forgive their sin, and I will heal their land.
But then His face turned solemn again, because many would not listen. Many would call this testimony fake. Many would scroll past the warning and laugh. And for them, the door would shut, not with anger, but with finality. The vision ended with one last image, the lamp in the field, flickering, almost out. But next to it, a child, kneeling, whispering one word over and over, "Jesus, Jesus, Jesus." And the lamp steadied, just for a moment longer. I awoke in my room, heart pounding, eyes wet, hands trembling. And I knew I could not stay silent. I am no prophet. I am no politician. I am not important. But I saw what I saw. I heard what I heard. And now it is up to you. This is not about Trump, not about Vance, not about politics. This is about the soul of a nation and the bride of Christ.
Tell them the time is short, the door is narrow, the night is near, and I am coming soon.
He who has ears to hear, let him hear.